Christina, it's all yours.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. As we're journeying through our book of canoeing the mountains and their experiences, we are in what the book is referred to as part 4, canoeing the mountains in uncharted territory. Adaption is everything, and it couldn't be more relevant to our current times. So I took a similar approach, but veering off a little bit. I'm going to go through some slides with just some key points for those that may still have not gotten the book or have gotten the books but haven't gotten through everything up to today. But this is more us talking about the different struggles that we're experiencing, struggles we've experienced in other aspects in the past, and how we've adapted, how we've changed personally or as the church, and getting us thinking about those transformations that have occurred afterwards. So let me move on to the next one. All right, so adaptive leadership. Some of the challenges that our author has pointed out in this part. As you can see, it's about learning. It results in loss. There are loss when there's any kind of change. Loss is not necessarily a negative thing, but there is a loss when things change. And also results in navigating competing values. And we'll get a little more into that about letting go, learning as we go, and keeping going. So, here we go. All right, so key leadership lessons. A shift in values, expectations, attitudes, or habits is necessary to face difficult challenges. We've all seen this throughout our lives. When challenges happen, we are changed through the process, as well as the end result is a manifestation of the change in our lives, in our organizations, in our circumstances. Through these changes, we're learning new information and skills. We're navigating competing values. This happens throughout life as our different seasons in life change, going from home to college to career to retirement to families. Each of those cause a change in values, not a negative change, but just a change in where we are in that part of our life. An important part of in leadership in this part is the mission trumps every other competing value and leads to the future. What we've learned in this section and what the author has tried to convey most is that when you're comparing those competing values and trying to decide where to go in our future as a church, is that you go back to your mission. And the path that leads to that mission is those values that lead down that path are the ones that will out during the time of change. And in that, we're reframing our ideas. If you're not learning anything new, it's not adaptive. It's not a time of change. Addressing a new challenge with an old solution is a technical approach, not an adaptive approach. So our tendencies is to find the technical solution, find the direct action. And this is this part is about evaluating and observing to look at the whole picture, the whole church. So, oh, sorry about that. Here we go. Reorientation. These were little aspects through the book that he kind of reminded throughout the chapters, since this covered about 5 chapters, on rethinking as you're getting all the information. And these are the kinds of thought-provoking that when we're asking the different challenging questions that we need to keep in mind. Leadership is learning to ask new questions that we have been too, oh, it did not write in there. Oh, gee. Okay, too busy, too proud, or too scared to ask. That should be scared in there. I missed a typo. In uncharted territory where no one knows what's ahead, similar to the time and season we are in now, vision is about accurately seeing ourselves and defining reality. And then as we're going through the discussions for the rest of today and in with our trusted companions or self-reflection, I want everybody to keep in mind what is the core to the DNA of our congregation. It's a huge question. But that's where, in essence, everything that we're asking is going to go back to discovering that. That not only ties into this book, but also into our season of visioning that we're in with the Priest in Charge model. All right, so here's where we're going to talk of kind of reflect back, and I didn't post the information here from our values that we realized that during our season of discovery, all the little dots that we put up outside the sanctuary and stuff. I want you to think back to 1 or 2 of those that stuck with you. Either ones that you put your dot by or ones that after seeing everything resonated. That's why I didn't pull up that data. I want us to talk about and engage in what comes forward when we think of those values from that time frame.
Well, I know worship was one of the ones that came forward.
Worship as in liturgy or just in general?
You know, Becky, I think we had it up in 2 different areas, and I'm not, I think community of worship. How about that?
Right. Fortunately, it's not letting me type, so I'm kind of writing this with my mouse. Everybody's going to see my computer abilities here.
Wow. I think if I'm remembering back to the dots, we had community, we had worship, we had music as distinct from worship. And then there was outreach. I was looking through, trying to scroll through some of my files here, and I couldn't find it quickly enough, but I remember those 4. And some of them overlap. Certainly worship and music overlap, and community and worship and overlap, but they aren't the same thing. So, but worship and community and music, we're pretty high on the list.
What else can we remember?
Don't forget outreach.
Okay.
Formation was one of them too.
As I look at that, any church would say these things, maybe not outreach as a top, but I wonder what's specific about our church, because in each of those, I think we'd say, well, this is how Good Shepherd does it. I wonder if we can be more specific.
Absolutely.
Christina, if you get out of slideshow, you can type into that.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, there we go. Unfortunately, that. All right, where's my text box? There we go.
I agree with Mary's observation. I think, the question is which of these and what aspects are critical or key or central to Shepherd's identity.
For instance, with music, though I've never been very much a part of it, that's a whole community in and of itself that ministers to one another, as well as produces lovely sound for the whole congregation. But I think when people say music, it includes their idea of that community, which I don't think many other churches could claim, not in the actual ministerial sense that ours does.
I don't need any help.
I think also as a part of that, music is one of our groups, but we have a sense of family among the congregation, that everybody is connected to everybody else in some way or another. And there's a lot of different subgroups that embody different interests from each person. And pretty much everybody is part of at least one of those groups. So there are people that we're connected to around the congregation that we have a tremendous interconnectedness, so that one group affects another, but yet you have groups with which you're closer. And so it's almost like a family situation in a lot of ways.
And Nan, I would see that as there are a lot of people that have that. And I think that that's what all of us aspire to. But I would have to say that there's some of us that aren't feeling that as much. But definitely an aspiration.
That's something that we need to look at then, and how we can reach out and bring those people who are not feeling that as much into some of these sub-interests, or develop things that will embrace them as well.
Absolutely.
I think we're confusing competence with values.
Well, I think we do value trying to make the stranger welcome. I don't know. I mean, it is a purpose, and it is something I think we do.
It's what brought me into this congregation.
Well, I think of a family that recently, relatively recently, started coming to Good Shepherd, and the comment of one of them, and this is all in this regard, is that when they walked in, felt like they'd been given a hug by the congregation. So, that I think reflects what Mary and Nan were sort of referring to.
And I think when we're talking about community, we're really talking about reaching out to the community around us. So, for example, things like music with a mission, use of our building, those types of things when we talk about community.
Well, I see community going two ways. One in relation to outreach and one in relation to community with each other. I think that has two parts. And both are very important.
And I think we had dots, a dot poster for each of those.
Mhm.
I also think we're talking about community. I also think community, this may be for more of a, just being in the youth group pretty much my whole time at Good Shepherd, but I also think about like how, like twice a year when we go to quests or mission trips or whatever, and we get to see all these kids that we only see during those times, that also feels so much community, and I know it does for the entire youth group. That just feels like it's a whole community within itself that we have inside jokes with and traditions, and that's just a whole family within itself as well. So I think it just goes beyond our church as well. Of that, our church is also in a very big community that lots of people are involved in.
And I think that holds true with outreach too. That the people who go to St. Clair's Kitchen or to the Covenant Cupboard to work create a community as well in that relationship.
So in this time of transformation and visioning, we have to look at how to pull in these keys to, how best to say this, to observing these values and recognizing which of these are going to lead to the mission of our congregation. But before we can get to that, you have to define the mission. And that is part of the discovery and the visioning is looking at what we have, what we want, and which of those values are going to get us to where we want. Going on to the next slide. I'm going to go back to slideshow here so everybody can see a little better. All right. This was something as a means of discussing not just the hybrid, but our current situations. And as Father Gary made reference to in the announcements of moving from season 1 to season 2 to season 3 of our current situation and what that looks like now and what it could look like in the future. And recognizing the values that we've just stated and how to incorporate that into getting to where we want on to use those values and realize those within our current situation. So what are some thoughts there? Either how we're meeting that, how we're not. What are you feeling?
Well, I mean, I feel like it was a technological change as opposed to an adaptive change, partly when we moved online. But I think we're turning it adaptive a little bit more every week. We've made sure that we're not limiting the numbers of people who are attending our worship. From the beginning times that were a very, straightforward morning prayer service, we're adding the music into it now in different ways than we were before. And so I think some of that is leading toward that adaptation. And I think that as we move forward, we have to continue that so that we are meeting the people on the fringes who don't feel comfortable coming back to church, even when we're able to open, we can still connect with them through online worship possibilities, even when we do go back to church. Because we're still going to have people that aren't comfortable coming back into a crowd at that point.
At that point, is this adaptive then?
Well, I think Ellen kind of got the gist of it. When we first started this, the technical response or solution, going to an online format instead of not having anything was a technical solution. However, as this season, and I want to call it a season because that means it changes and moves forward, this season has meant that we're having to be more adaptive as we see that this is going to go longer than we initially anticipated or hoped. So I think when this all started, the idea was 1 or 2 months of isolation and we'd be good to go. And we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case for our societies now. So now we're in the adaptive of, okay, we've solved the solution. How do we use what we have and the season we're in to keep with our values?
It seems to me that we still haven't addressed the issue, not that we could, but we need to look into it, is the question I had last week, in that we're becoming much more adept, as people have already said this morning, at pastoring and being community within ourselves. But it's really hard to reach out when we're afraid we're going to get Zoom bombed, for example. And so you have to be in the know to get the email. And I totally understand and support this way that we're doing it. But again, the technical solution isn't just to open it up, right? That would be a technical solution. What's the adaptive way to bring people in? I know other communities have the worship on Facebook, but then it's very much more one way. People can't participate back, right? So to me, the adaptive part of this is figuring out how we can, not necessarily the world, but at least our own community, local community, meaning within the metro area of Denver, how do we include others that are searching, who are hungering for a church and all the doors are closed, literally. And so how do they find one if we're all protecting ourselves from being, having people come in and crash the system or say horrible things in the middle of the service? That to me would be an adaptive solution that we're searching for.
Well, Becky, I think one way we're starting to do that is by recording the services and posting them online, because then someone that's searching can actually see the service. So that's one change. I agree with you. I don't think it's enough yet, but we're moving in the right direction.
Thanks for that clarification.
I've been thinking that it's probably time to maybe make a mailing, especially to the people that are, within a radius of, say, the church, saying, if you would like to join us for worship, you can call such and such and or email, and we'll email you the connection you need. So to begin to reach out again under these circumstances where people may actually becoming quite desperate to be able to reach other people, especially those that weren't well connected to start with.
I think that may need to be a part of our Facebook page, of our web, our internet interface, and all the rest, that there are ways how to reach out to us to get connected, to become inclusive in the group, as opposed to just being
just to address this, because I don't think everybody goes onto our website very often, because it's our website and we don't need to go there very often. But the information on how to do this is there. So, I'm not saying that we've done everything that we need to do. I don't think that's the case at all. But a couple of considerations. One is, we do have, if folks go to the website and they want to figure out how to to get to our worship, you know, we tell them that they have to sign up to the newsletter. This prevents them from, you know, prevents the options for Zoom bombing. So they get the e-news, which gives the link to the worship and the reminder, and we send that out, you know, as well on Facebook occasionally. We're running into a problem, and I think our colleagues who are doing the Facebook live streaming, we're running into some challenges with copyright issues and streaming stuff. So a lot of what we have been doing, we're going to pull down so that we don't run foul of copyright issues, because, you know, we're streaming, putting things out on YouTube, you know, maybe without permission from the original, you know, from the author or whatever. So, I mean, we're trying to address, this is part of the adaptive stuff, is figuring out what we can do, what we can't do, you know, what the paddles that we've been given in the canoes will do and what they won't do, all of those sorts of things. We're working on that. But I think that the other thing, and this gets, again, to sort of the question that Becky was raising, is that there's the individual E-word thing going on here. You know, why don't you join us on a Sunday morning and see what it looks like from our perspective? Here is the link for you to be able to do that. It's not the broad sort of mailing. I'm not criticizing any of that. It's not that sort of broader piece, but it brings it down to the folks that we know and that we see on a regular basis, whether they're in our neighborhoods and we actually physically see them on a regular basis, or we see them in other contexts. You know, so there's that E word that's part of this as well. But I'm not so sure, and Becky, I'm gonna push back a little bit here, that the goal is to get people to come to a Zoom meeting at 9 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Is that our mission? And I think that the point that that Bolsinger makes is, what's the mission? Is the mission to bring people in, or is the mission for us to send our folks out? And how do we do that as well? So anyway.
I didn't mean that it was to have people necessarily come at 9 o'clock or just to always come on Sundays. I meant it more in the context of almost ministering to a community that's hurting, that maybe has never gone to church.
Right.
And they're looking for something that at this moment, that's what I meant, not just to get more numbers at the bottom of the screen of how many people have logged into the call, to the Zoom call. But yeah, that's a good point.
I've been thinking that this thing that's happening Thursday night, people who belong to Good Shepherd are not the only ones who are mentally freaked over what's going on and not knowing how this is going to be in the future. That thing that we're doing Thursday night could be a ministry to the whole neighborhood if we knew how to safely invite them into that discussion. I'm
going to answer that, and then Mark Kelly raised his hand, so I want Mark to get in here. Oh. But Deb, I think one of the things we can do, and I can give this to Dee Dee to do, is we can send it out on as many next door links as we have, and that's a lot of folks. You know, so we could do that, and we can certainly prevent, you know, anybody from sharing screens. I can do that. We can kick people out. I can be a pretty attentive door monitor, put it that way. I'm muting people all of the time who unmute themselves, and then we get to hear their dog. Mark Kelly raised your hand. Unmute yourself and say what it was you wanted to say.
Sure. I have a couple of things. One is this medium that we're using, Zoom or Facebook Live. It's always a screen, so the form factor is a bit a barrier, isn't it, between interaction? It's certainly not the same as being there.
Right.
And I don't know how we go about being there, but there's a certain thisness, if I could say it, about being with a screen versus being with somebody, even if it's 6 feet away. One thing that comes to mind is, I guess about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Jim Wolf called everybody on the men's group and just checked in, saying, you know, wanted to make sure everything's fine. And I thought, I was rather touched by that because I didn't ask for that, and he kind of just outreached. And like we used to give bread, remember that? We used to give bread to newcomers. So certainly can't give food, but I don't know, maybe we have a little task force or group that goes out to people that are just joining and we deliver a plant. I guess a flower would be okay. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, Gary, was when you said about copyright use. There's different copyright laws. You probably know this, but there's one for commercial use and one for education. And my question is, well, to me, this seems more like education than commercial use because we're not an ongoing concern that raises revenue for. But how do we fall in that?
Believe me, everybody is talking about this, and it's way beyond the scope of what we're talking about this morning. But there are questions about what can you reprint for single use, like in a bulletin. That's one licensing thing. What can you stream is another licensing thing. What can go out on YouTube is yet another licensing thing. There are all of these various licenses, and they don't all cover the same stuff. So some of it might cover music, and some of it might cover text, and some of it might cover choral anthems. And so we're busy scrambling to figure out what we can and we can't do. And we're not the only ones. And so it's just way beyond what many of us know. And like I say, we're struggling with it. It's different than educational use. We're not using it for education. That's different, and it's not commercial because we're not looking to get any money from it. But it's a mess. It's a mess, and there aren't any easy answers.
All right, thank you, Gary, for kind of helping us through some of the stuff. I know that I really feel that to answer that, Mark, to also weigh in, is that this is part of the adaptive, is that because we can't meet in person at the moment, or when we can, it'll be smaller groups and at the 6 feet and observing the recommendations and stuff to stay healthy and safe moving forward until a time comes that we feel that those kind of measures are not as necessary. But this is the kind of challenges. If you recall from the book, until Lewis and Clark were in the middle of the Rockies, they still felt they were going to find that water pathway. And they kept believing in the water passageway until it was absolutely apparent that that wasn't going to happen. So I think we're kind of in that same spot right now, is that we're in the mountains and we're still hoping that we're going to be able to return to a semblance of what things look like in the past. But we're on that cusp where it's obvious that it is going to look very different in the future. It may get back closer to what it is in the past, but it is going to change. So we're in that adaptive mode at the moment.
But I think we also have to be careful. We have, and I did in the introduction of this book, and we have continued to talk a lot about the situation that we've been thrown into through no choice of our own. And we weren't in that situation when we decided we were going to talk about this book, and how when the bishop asked everybody to read it, we weren't in a COVID world. And so I think that we also need to think about not just how are we getting to worship together, how are we getting to keep our community and connection, but I think we also have to think about what that outreach part, that getting out to reach people that are outside of our gonna call it our built-in community right now of members who are getting getting the newsletter, getting all the information about worship, and the outreach is important to us. So I think we need to make sure that we remember that part of this.
That's very true, and that leans in perfectly and segues into the personal and group ponderings. Thanks, Ellen. I'm realizing. I think your response is one of the first things that we've gotten. What evokes a strong reaction? And we do have to recognize that even though we're in this season with COVID, we are also in the visioning time with our priest in charge. And where does our mission? What are we looking forward outside of the season, but also recognizing that our current experience is in the season, but won't always. Some of the other things is what resonates with your experience. Let's try and think back to before our COVID season right now. What resonates with your experience with Good Shepherd? We've talked about what brings in, what keeps us. Why Good Shepherd?
Well, this is Jim, and Good Shepherd is my family. So, I mean, I just consider Good Shepherd an extension of my family, and that's what keeps me here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not bragging on us or anything like that, but I've been surprised, I guess, pleasantly surprised that our attendance hasn't dropped. I mean, we had the spike on Easter, but that everybody has the spike on Easter, but the overall attendance has been very, very steady ever since we went online. We had to figure out how to get more than 100 screens going. We've got it, and we've been regularly every week since then, over 100 screens. So our attendance hasn't gone down. And when I talk to my colleagues, my clergy colleagues, many of them are talking about having to shorten their services to keep people engaged. And we haven't done that. I mean, I've put together a regular morning prayer service that takes an hour. And it takes an hour. We were doing an hour and a quarter or so, for Eucharist, but we haven't dropped folks. And so I think that this speaks a little bit to what you were saying, Jim, is that there's something, and this even goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. There's something that binds the folks at Good Shepherd together, that being able to see people, even if it's in a little 2x2 screen inset, really is important. And I think that what we're seeing, even though this may not have shown up so much on the dots, but what I think we're seeing is a real strong commitment or real strong value coming out of who Good Shepherd is that this value of internal community is really important. So I think, that talk about resonating with our experience, I think that is, even going back to, the annual meeting a year and a half ago, where the community rose up and said, this is who we are. And that, there was a galvanizing moment there. So I think that is really important and core to who Good Shepherd is. How we move that forward in this COVID land, that's a challenge. But anyway, I'm going to shut up.
And I was going to say, we have probably about 200 families, and we're getting about 100 families on the worship service. So we have an opportunity there to reach out to that other 100 families and at least encourage them to try the worship service and see if perhaps that meets their needs. I think we all have to remember that we're going to be involved in doing this probably at least for the next 6 months.
Oh, I think the hybrid society is here to stay. I would not make any predictions about 6 months. I think this is something, like Gary said, that Good Shepherd is poised to do, receptive to do, and I think this is something that we have to seriously start thinking about as part of our ministry. We will be in the hybrid society for sure.
The beautiful advantage to it, though, is that we do have a decently large population of older folks who sometimes it's hard for them to travel, especially in the winter, even when everyone's healthy. And this way they can still fully participate in a meaningful way in the worship life of our church. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to continue this, for at least for that very reason, or people who are sick who can't come, who can still not just watch it later but be part of it. I think it's, or just had a baby and they can't leave for 6 weeks, they're home. I just think that the possibilities are endless. To me, it's a wonderful opening up of possibilities. I think it's great, and we have the technology, not just the technical solution, but the technology to do it.
And also with our small dinner groups and things like that, that's part of the hybrid society, and we're already doing it. We already have a tradition of hungry flock and that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to probably be looking at in the future, besides the technology, the small gatherings.
Yeah, I think all of these are really valid observations. And I continue to believe that this paradigm shift that we're going through is bringing us opportunities. Yes, this is a challenging time, but this will bring us tremendous opportunities to reach out in new ways. It doesn't mean that our why changes, our reason for being changes. And I think, that goes to our values and our mission, and how much we value bringing different folks together, finding new ways to do that, exploring ways to have open relationships with each other, and explore our faith together. I've shared this with others. In a way, this new day that we've been brought into has forced us to think outside that box, but we were thinking about doing a lot of these things before. Our hand just wasn't forced. And now there's an opportunity to reach out to folks who maybe can't come in on a Sunday, or even on a more simple basis. If you're not feeling well, and if you're under the weather, and if we have a hybrid type of worship opportunity or gathering opportunity for any of our groups, folks can still join. So we're exploring new ways to get together and to connect, and I think that'll be a good thing. And ultimately, that helps to build generations of faithful leadership and reaches across generations too.
And because the youth in particular is so much more technologically advanced than many of us who are in the older generation, I think it's a good way to get them involved and bring them into that leadership position, because they have a lot of skills that we just don't have. And they think differently than we do because they grew up with this. And I think they can help us in a lot of ways and feel empowered. And frankly, everybody wants to feel needed and feel like they have a purpose and a use, and not just be a hangers-on.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that goes through a lot of the ponderings and stuff. We're reaffirming what we've learned in this, what's challenged some of our assumptions. Do you want everyone to kind of take a moment, rather you choose to share, although that would be nice, or just kind of jot it down for you to reflect on during the coming week and stuff? What is one wish, hope, or dream you have for the future of our church?
Put them in the chat function so we can save them.
Yay. Okay, let's do that. Hold on.
Perfect place.
Yeah.
That's a perfect.
I hope we're not losing our younger generation.
Ellen, can I just ask what you mean by that? Do you mean that because we aren't able to meet physically together, that they don't have the opportunity to be together? Or is there something else that's just a more deeper systemic issue?
You know, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that our kids, you know, our kids learn from watching. I think about when our smallest children who come to church, and they learn by watching, and they see what the adults are doing. They hear the words over and over, and it just becomes a part of them. As anything that we practice, we build muscle memory in our brains and in our bodies. And I worry that for some of our kids, and I'm not just talking teenagers like mine are, but our younger children, are they building that muscle memory of what this means?
You know, I was kind of startled this week when I heard the bishop say, but if I guess if we all stop and think about it, it's probably true. But her statement was that when you look at the parishioners in the Episcopal Church in Colorado, half of our parishioners are 65 or older. And that just kind of took me by surprise. And yet when I looked at our own church, unfortunately, we pretty much fit into that. I just thought that was interesting.
I don't know if she was speaking just about Colorado or if she was speaking about the church in general, but that's not to say it wouldn't be the case for us as well. But to get to Ellen's, a little bit to Ellen's concern, and I don't want to keep nattering on here, but are there opportunities in post-COVID land to rethink, redevelop how folks are connected, to think of muscle memory in a different way? You know, what's a different kind of muscle memory? And, you know, is it the way that we've been thinking, you know, that we can walk into a room and say, the Lord be with you, and everybody knows what the right response is? Is there a different muscle memory that can be developed because we're forced to use a different set of tools?
Isn't part of this to do some actual research?
Yes, it is. But part of listening and observing, but before I felt going through this in our time frame, because I saw other lessons were hour and a half, 2 hours on this section, is that we needed to understand what we were looking for, not just observing what we'd observed in the past or in the same way we had in the past. So my goal through this was to get those thought provocation and asking the hard questions, so that when we observe and we can bring in that new learning that we talked about at the beginning. So, because moving outward from this is hold on, where is it? There we go. Here we go. And this is kind of a wrap up of what they want to ask questions that reveal the values. and that we're learning what we're observing, the seek the new perspectives, learning and transformation. And then as you're also self-reflection or with that trusted companion is raising those deeper issues at work in the community. Asking, are we wanting to see how we get this, the muscle memory, the keeping our younger generation, the continued connections? How do we continue to with outreach and refocus that once we're past this season of abundance of caution? Or what does that look like in this season? So these are the questions and the means, looking from our place of values and our mission, and also defining where we want the mission to be and what that changes in the context for us. So this particular section is that really deep. These are the actions that we're going to be repeating throughout our visioning and throughout defining our coming mission, not just through this season, but moving forward out of this season and into others. And then just as a little, so you'll want to reflect on those, everything we've talked about, all the questions raised, and then reading chapters 12 and 13 for next week.
Thank you, Christina. I want to throw something in here. I was asked by by Mike Orr's office. He's the communications officer at the office of the bishop, to revise the article that I wrote for the sheepskin that I think came out at the end of January, the one that was the family piano, so that they could reprint it in the Colorado Episcopalian. So that'll happen in the next issue, I guess. But in my revision, and I'll just let you all know this because you'll see it anyway, I don't want to say that I began to take issue with the theoretical underpinnings of canoeing the mountains, but the goal of and Bolsinger gets to it a little bit, but the goal of the Lewis and Clark expedition was to find a road, a way, a path to the Pacific Ocean. They knew the Pacific Ocean lay to the west. They knew that, and they were just their task was to figure out the best way to get there. And I began to think that our role or our situation is less the voyage of discovery that Lewis and Clark were on. Ours is more like the Starship Enterprise, to boldly go where no one's ever gone before. They just sort of set out into the I don't want to say the blue, into the dark of outer space, not knowing where they were going to end. And I wonder if that might not be a little bit better analogy, because we don't know what's going to look like on the other side after we've progressed through COVID land. We don't know what's going to be out there. Just as a preview of what you'll see in the Colorado Episcopalian is that, and an image that I've found to be a little more helpful, is we don't know what's there, and that's not just COVID land, but that's also in the season of visioning. How do we craft a vision for absolutely unknown? It's not just getting through the uncharted territory. We don't know what we're going to find. Whereas Lewis and Clark, once they got to Astoria, Oregon, or Cape Disappointment, or all those places they got to on the Oregon coast, they knew that was the Pacific Ocean. They just had figured out a way to get there that wasn't what they expected. Anyway, thank you, Christina.
Welcome.
Hello, everyone.